The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. Sarah Mitchell sat beside her husband's bed, watching him sleep peacefully after what the doctors called a miraculous recovery from his car accident. 3 weeks of coma, and now he was awake, but claiming he remembered nothing about their 5-year marriage. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. "I'm sorry," David had said earlier, his green eyes filled with what seemed like genuine confusion. I don't remember you at all. The doctors say I have retrograde amnesia. Everything from the past 6 years is just gone." Sarah had played the part of the devastated wife perfectly, tears streaming down her face as she held his hand. But inside, she was calculating. She'd seen the text messages on his phone before the accident, messages to his secretary, Rebecca Chen, making plans to leave her after their upcoming anniversary dinner. She'd seen the divorce papers hidden in his study, already filled out and ready to file. David Mitchell, successful corporate lawyer and master manipulator, thought he was so clever. But Sarah had been reborn in those 3 weeks of sitting by his bedside, and now she was ready to play a game of her own. "Welcome home, sweetheart," Sarah said, helping David through the front door of their Victorian house in Portland, Oregon. She'd spent hours preparing for this moment, removing all photos from the past 2 years when their marriage had started falling apart, leaving only the happy memories displayed. David looked around their home with manufactured wonder. "This is beautiful. We lived here together?" "For 4 years," Sarah lied smoothly. "You bought it as a surprise for our first anniversary. Said you wanted to fill it with children and laughter." She watched his face carefully, noting the slight flicker of discomfort at the mention of children, something he'd recently told Rebecca he never wanted. "Children," he repeated softly. Do we have any?" "We were trying," Sarah said, her voice carefully modulated with just the right amount of wistfulness. "You were so excited about becoming a father. You'd already picked out names, Emma for a girl, James for a boy, after your grandfather." David's grandfather had died when he was 5, and Sarah knew David had always resented the man for abandoning the family. She watched with satisfaction as David's jaw tightened slightly. I wish I could remember," he said. "The doctors say the memories might come back gradually," Sarah replied, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I'll help you remember everything. After all, I'm your wife. It's my job to take care of you." Over the next few days, Sarah played her role flawlessly. She cooked David's favorite meals, wore the dresses he'd once complimented, and told him stories of their perfect marriage. But she also began to plant seeds of doubt. "You were always so romantic," she said one evening as they sat on the porch swing he'd actually bought for his mother's house. "You used to write me love letters every week. You said I was the only woman you'd ever truly love." David shifted uncomfortably. "I wrote you love letters?" "Every Friday," Sarah nodded. "You said it was important to keep the romance alive. You were so afraid of becoming like your father, cold and distant." This was true. David's father had been emotionally absent, and David had always sworn he'd be different. But Sarah knew he'd become exactly what he'd feared. "And you were so thoughtful," Sarah continued. "You remembered every anniversary, every special date. You said forgetting important moments was the first step toward taking someone for granted." David's face grew pale. He'd forgotten their last 3 anniversaries, something Sarah had cried about in private. "I sound like a good husband," he said quietly. "The best," Sarah agreed. "That's why this is so hard. You're not acting like yourself at all since the accident. It's like you've become a different person." Sarah's plan was working perfectly. David was trying so hard to be the man she described that he was exhausting himself. He brought her flowers daily, wrote awkward love notes, and spent hours asking her about their shared memories. But the real test came when Rebecca Chen called. "David?" Rebecca's voice was anxious through the phone speaker. "I heard about the accident. Are you okay? I've been so worried." "I'm sorry," David said, glancing at Sarah. "I'm afraid I don't remember you." "I have amnesia." Sarah watched the color drain from his face as Rebecca's shock transmitted through the phone. Amnesia? But David, we were supposed to meet last week. About the papers? Papers? Sarah interjected sweetly, taking the phone from David's nerveless fingers. This is Sarah, David's wife. He can't remember anything from the past several years. What papers were you referring to? The line went quiet for a long moment. I must have been confused. Work papers. I'm his secretary. Of course, Sarah said. Well, David won't be returning to work for quite some time. The doctors say stress could make his condition worse. I'll be sure to tell him you called. After hanging up, Sarah turned to David, who was staring at his hands. She seemed upset. Were you two close? I don't know, David said, but Sarah could see the lie in his eyes. I don't remember her at all. Sarah decided to turn up the pressure. That evening, she prepared a candlelit dinner, the same meal they'd eaten on their first anniversary, when they'd still been happy. This was our first anniversary dinner, she said, serving the pasta. You were so nervous that night, you kept fidgeting with something in your pocket. David raised an eyebrow. What was in my pocket? A ring, Sarah said softly. Not an engagement ring. We were already married. But you'd bought me a promise ring. You said it was a symbol of your commitment to always choosing me, every day, for the rest of our lives. She pulled out the ring, a simple band with a small diamond that David had actually given her for their second anniversary, before things went bad. She'd kept it in her jewelry box, unworn for 3 years. You said marriage wasn't just about the big moments, Sarah continued. It was about the daily choice to love someone, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. David took the ring with shaking hands. I said that? You said you'd seen too many couples give up when things got difficult. You promised me you'd never be one of those men who just walked away. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. David slipped the ring onto her finger, and Sarah saw something break behind his eyes. Bappo came a week later. David had been acting increasingly agitated, caught between the man Sarah was telling him he was and the man he actually was. He'd started having, quote, headaches and spending long hours in his study, which Sarah suspected were really phone calls to Rebecca. But first, Sarah had another card to play. She'd been saving David's mother's visit for maximum impact. David, your mother called, Sarah said over breakfast. She wants to visit this weekend. She's been so worried about you. David nearly choked on his coffee. My mother? Margaret, Sarah said smoothly. She's been calling every day since your accident. She's driving down from Seattle on Saturday. The truth was, Margaret Mitchell had always disapproved of Sarah. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she thought her son had married beneath him. But Sarah knew that David's relationship with his mother was complicated. He craved her approval while simultaneously resenting her criticism. What did I tell her about us? David asked carefully. Oh, you always spoke so lovingly about our marriage when she was around, Sarah said. You said I was the best thing that ever happened to you. You told her you couldn't wait to give her grandchildren. This was partially true. David had put on a show for his mother, pretending their marriage was perfect even when it was falling apart. But he'd also complained bitterly to Sarah about his mother's expectations and her constant questions about when they'd have children. She's bringing photo albums, Sarah continued. She said she wanted to help you remember all the family gatherings where you talked about how much you loved being married. David's face went pale. Sarah knew he was remembering the last family gathering, where he'd gotten drunk and made a toast about how marriage was the death of dreams, while his mother watched in horror. That evening, Sarah decided it was time for the final act. David, she said, entering his study with a cup of coffee. I found something. She placed a folder on his desk, the same folder where he'd hidden the divorce papers. But instead of divorce papers, she'd filled it with fake love letters, supposedly written by him to her over the years. I was looking for your insurance information, she said, and I found these. I'd forgotten you kept copies of all your letters to me. David opened the folder and stared at the papers. Sarah had worked hard on the letters, copying his handwriting and filling them with the kind of romantic sentiment he'd once expressed but had stopped years ago. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My dearest Sarah, one letter read, I know I don't say it enough, but you are my world. I can't imagine my life without you. Every day I wake up grateful that you chose me. I promise to love you until my last breath. Another letter, supposedly from their 3rd anniversary, read, I know I've been distant lately, caught up in work and my own fears, but I want you to know that even when I'm struggling, even when I'm not the husband you deserve, you remain the center of my universe. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be the man you fell in love with. David's hands were shaking as he read. I wrote these? The last one is from just a month before your accident, Sarah said. You were planning something special for our anniversary. You said you had a surprise that would show me how much I meant to you. She pulled out one final letter, this one supposedly written just days before his accident. Sarah, my love, I've been thinking about our future. I know I've been working too much, been too focused on my career. But I want to change. I want to be present for our marriage. I want to be the husband who deserves you. This anniversary, I'm going to show you just how committed I am to us. Forever and always, David. She watched as David's face went through a range of emotions, guilt, confusion, and something that might have been genuine remorse. You were so excited about the surprise, Sarah continued, twisting the knife deeper. You said it would be the most romantic thing you'd ever done. You said it would prove to me that I was your priority, not your work. David set the letters down with trembling hands. What? What was the surprise? Sarah looked away, as if the memory was too painful. I don't know. You never got to tell me. The accident happened 2 days before our anniversary. That night, as David lay in bed beside her, Sarah heard him crying quietly. She almost felt guilty for the elaborate fiction she'd created. Almost. Saturday morning arrived with Margaret Mitchell's silver Mercedes pulling into their driveway. Sarah watched from the window as David's mother emerged, perfectly coiffed and carrying a large photo album and what appeared to be a casserole dish. She brought your favorite, Sarah whispered to David, who was standing frozen in the hallway. Tuna casserole. She always made it for you when you were sick as a child. Margaret Mitchell was a formidable woman in her 70s, with steel gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she'd never doubted herself about anything. She swept into the house with the authority of someone who'd raised 3 successful children and buried 1 difficult husband. David, my poor boy, she said, embracing him tightly. How are you feeling? Sarah's been keeping me updated, but I needed to see for myself. I'm fine, Mother, David stammered. I don't remember much. Margaret stepped back and studied his face with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. Well, that's what we're here to fix. I've brought photos from every family gathering for the past 6 years. We're going to help you remember what a wonderful marriage you have. Sarah bit back a smile. Margaret had no idea she was about to become an unwitting accomplice in Sarah's elaborate fiction. They settled in the living room, where Margaret opened the photo album with ceremony. Now, this is from your 2nd anniversary party, she said, pointing to a picture of David and Sarah cutting a cake. You made such a beautiful speech about how marriage had made you a better man. Sarah watched David's face as he stared at the photo. In it, he looked happy. Genuinely happy. But Sarah remembered that day differently. They'd fought that morning about money, and David had been cold and distant until the guests arrived. What did I say in the speech? David asked quietly. Oh, you were so eloquent, Margaret beamed. You said that before Sarah you were just existing, but with her you were truly living. You said she'd taught you what it meant to put someone else's happiness before your own. Sarah felt a stab of pain. She remembered the speech too, and Margaret was right about the words. But she also remembered David's behavior afterward, how he'd ignored her for the rest of the evening, focusing on his work colleagues and treating her like a decoration. And this one, Margaret continued, flipping to another photo, is from last Christmas. You were so excited about the necklace you'd bought Sarah. You said it took you months to find the perfect one. David looked at Sarah, confusion evident in his eyes. I bought you a necklace? Sarah nodded, touching the simple gold chain around her neck. You said it reminded you of my grandmother's. the one she wore in her wedding photos. This was true. David had given her the necklace, but it hadn't been a romantic gesture. He'd bought it at the last minute at the airport, rushing home from a business trip he'd extended by 3 days to avoid spending time with her family. "You were always so thoughtful," Margaret said, patting David's arm. "I remember calling you that week, and you spent 20 minutes telling me about all the romantic things you had planned for the new year. You said you wanted to recommit to your marriage." Sarah saw David's face go white. She hadn't known about this conversation, but she could imagine what David had actually said to his mother, probably complaints about feeling trapped and suffocated. "I did?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh yes," Margaret continued, oblivious to the emotional landmine she was walking through. "You said you'd been taking Sarah for granted, and you wanted to change that. You said you were going to start writing her love letters again, like you did when you were dating." Sarah felt her heart clench. Even in his conversation with his mother, David had been maintaining the fiction of their perfect marriage. But she also heard the truth hidden in Margaret's words. David had been taking her for granted, and on some level he'd known it. The afternoon continued, with Margaret sharing more photos and stories, each one a knife twist of truth mixed with fiction. David grew quieter and more withdrawn with each revelation about the man he was supposed to be. Finally, as Margaret was leaving, she pulled David aside. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I know I wasn't always supportive of your marriage in the beginning. I thought you were too young, too focused on your career. But watching you with Sarah over the years, seeing how you've grown as a husband, it's been beautiful." After Margaret left, David sat in his study for hours, staring at the photo album she'd left behind. Sarah found him there at midnight, his head in his hands. "I can't do this," he said without looking up. "I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "I'm not the man in these pictures," David said. "I'm not the man in those letters. I'm not the man my mother thinks I am, or the man you deserve." Sarah sat down across from him. "Then, who are you?" David looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "I'm a man who was planning to leave his wife the day after their anniversary. I'm a man who was having an affair with his secretary. I'm a man who wrote divorce papers in secret and hid them like a coward." The confession hung in the air between them like a physical presence. "Rebecca, I can't do this anymore," he was saying. "I know I don't really have amnesia, but..." God, what kind of man was I? What kind of man plans to leave his wife the day after their anniversary? Sarah's heart stopped. He was confessing. "She's been taking care of me," David continued. "She's been so patient, so loving. She talks about this man I used to be. This man who wrote her love letters and remembered anniversaries and wanted children. And I threw all of that away. I threw her away." "David, you weren't happy," Rebecca's voice fainted through the phone. "You said the marriage was over. You said you felt trapped." "I was a coward," David said. "I was going to blindside her with divorce papers instead of fighting for our marriage. Instead of trying to become the man she deserved." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. This wasn't part of her plan. "I can't file those papers now," David continued. "I can't leave her, not after seeing what we could have been. Not after seeing how she loves me, even when she thinks I don't remember her." "So you're going to keep lying to her?" Rebecca asked. "I'm going to become the man she thinks I am," David said. "The man I should have been all along." The confession hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sarah had been waiting for this moment. But now that it was here, she felt strangely empty. "So you do remember," she said quietly. David nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I never had amnesia. I was conscious during the accident. I remember everything, the rain, the tree, the moment I realized I might die. And all I could think about was how I was going to hurt you. But you decided to fake it anyway." "I panicked," David said. "When I woke up in the hospital and saw you there, crying, looking so scared, I couldn't bear to hurt you more. So I lied. Sarah stood up and walked to the window. How long were you planning to keep it up? I don't know. Forever, maybe. I thought if I could just be the man you wanted me to be, maybe we could start over. Maybe I could become someone worthy of your love. By lying to me. Yes, David said. By lying to you. I know how that sounds. I know how insane it is. But these past few weeks, pretending to be the man you described, it felt like the first time I'd been truly alive in years. Sarah turned back to him. And Rebecca? I ended it. The day after I woke up. I told her I couldn't see her anymore, that I was going to work on my marriage. Because you suddenly grew a conscience? Because I realized what I was throwing away, David said. You sat by my bedside for 3 weeks. You held my hand and talked to me even when the doctors said I might never wake up. You loved me even when I was unconscious, even when I couldn't give you anything back. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. I did love you, past tense. I know, David said. I know I killed that love. I know I don't deserve another chance. But Sarah, if there's any part of you that still cares about what we had, please, let me try to earn it back. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I need to tell you something too. David looked up at her, hope and fear warring in his expression. I knew you were faking the amnesia, Sarah said. I knew from the beginning. The color drained from David's face. What? I saw the divorce papers before your accident. I knew about Rebecca. I knew what you were planning to do. David stared at her in shock. Then why? Why did you play along? Because I wanted you to suffer, Sarah said simply. I wanted you to feel guilty. I wanted you to see what you were throwing away and regret it for the rest of your life. Jesus, David whispered. So all of this, the stories about our perfect marriage, the love letters, the things you told my mother, all lies, Sarah confirmed, designed to make you hate yourself for what you were planning to do. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of their mutual deception settling between them. We're quite a pair, David said finally, both of us pretending to be someone we're not. The difference is, Sarah said, I was pretending to save our marriage. You were pretending to end it. No, David said quietly. I think we were both pretending for the same reason. We were both trying to avoid the truth. Which is, that we're two people who loved each other once, and we're both too scared to figure out if we still do. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept fitfully beside her. She thought about the past few weeks, about the elaborate fiction they'd both maintained, about the glimpses of the man David used to be that had emerged through his performance. The next morning, she made a decision that would change everything. David, she said over breakfast, I want to try something. He looked up from his untouched coffee. What? I want us to start over, not with lies this time, but with truth. I want us to tell each other everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I want to see if there's anything left worth saving. David's eyes widened. You mean? I mean marriage counseling. I mean couples therapy. I mean both of us learning how to be honest with each other for the first time in years. Why? David asked. After everything I've done, why would you want to try? Sarah considered the question. Because these past few weeks, when you were trying to be the man I told you that you were, I saw glimpses of the man I fell in love with. And I realized that maybe the problem wasn't that you changed. Maybe the problem was that we both stopped trying to be the best versions of ourselves. And you think we can find our way back to that? I don't know, Sarah admitted, but I think we owe it to the people we used to be to try. Dr. Elena Martinez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the sort of calm demeanor that suggested she'd seen every type of marital crisis imaginable. Her office was decorated with soft colors and comfortable furniture, designed to put people at ease while they discussed the most difficult aspects of their lives. So, Dr. Martinez said, settling into her chair with a notepad, what brings you both here today? Sarah and David exchanged a look. They'd agreed to be completely honest, but sitting in the therapist's office, the weight of their deception felt overwhelming. "We've been lying to each other," Sarah said finally. "For weeks, maybe for years." Dr. Martinez nodded encouragingly. "Can you tell me more about that?" David took a deep breath. "I was planning to divorce my wife. I had the papers drawn up, I was having an affair, and I was going to leave her right after our anniversary. But then David was in a car accident," Sarah continued. "And when he woke up, he told me he had amnesia. He said he couldn't remember our marriage." "But you didn't have amnesia," Dr. Martinez said to David. "It wasn't a question." "No," David admitted. "I was faking it. I thought, if I could pretend to be the man Sarah wanted me to be, maybe I could become that man." "And you knew he was faking it," Dr. Martinez said to Sarah. "Yes," Sarah said. "I knew about the divorce papers. I knew about the affair. So I decided to play along with his amnesia story, but I created this elaborate fiction about our perfect marriage to make him feel guilty." Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "So you were both performing versions of yourselves that you thought the other person wanted to see?" "Yes," they said in unison. "And how did that feel?" "Exhausting," David said. "I was trying so hard to be someone I wasn't that I forgot who I actually was." "Powerful," Sarah said, "but also lonely. I was controlling the narrative of our relationship, but I wasn't actually connecting with my husband." "What I find interesting," Dr. Martinez said, "is that you both chose to engage in this elaborate performance rather than simply have an honest conversation about your marriage. What do you think that says about your relationship?" Sarah and David looked at each other. "That we're both cowards," David said. "That we'd rather lie than be vulnerable," Sarah added. "That we've forgotten how to talk to each other," David continued. Dr. Martinez nodded. "Those are all valid observations. But I'd like to suggest another possibility. Maybe you both engaged in this performance because you both still care about your marriage. Maybe you both still love each other, but you've lost the tools to express that love in healthy ways." "Is that possible?" Sarah asked. "After everything we've done to each other? Love is remarkably resilient," Dr. Martinez said. "But it requires honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to do the hard work of rebuilding trust. Are you both willing to do that work?" Sarah looked at David, really looked at him, for the first time in months. She saw the man she'd married, but also the man he'd become, and the man he might still be able to become. "I'm willing to try," she said. David reached for her hand. "So am I." And in that moment, sitting in a therapist's office, surrounded by the wreckage of their deception, Sarah and David began the long, difficult work of building a real marriage on the foundation of truth. "Why?" Sarah asked, sitting across from him. "Why did you want to leave?" David looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "Because I was scared. Because I felt like I was failing at being a husband, and instead of trying harder, I decided to run away. And Rebecca was a mistake, a symptom of my cowardice, not the cause of it." He reached across the table tentatively. "Sarah, these past few weeks, seeing the man you thought I was, it made me realize what I'd lost, what I'd thrown away." Sarah studied his face. "The man I described to you, he wasn't entirely fictional, you know. You used to be that man. In the beginning." "I know," David said, "and I want to be him again. Not because I'm pretending to have amnesia, but because I choose to be. Because I chose you." "It's not that simple," Sarah said. "You can't just decide to be a different person." "No," David agreed, "but I can decide to try. Every day, the way you said I promised to do." Over the following weeks, Sarah and David attended therapy sessions twice a week. Each session was like emotional archaeology, carefully excavating years of buried resentments, unspoken needs, and mutual disappointments. "I want to explore the affair," Dr. Martinez said during their fourth session. "David, can you help me understand what led you to that decision?" David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I felt invisible in my own marriage. Sarah was always busy with her art classes, her book club, her volunteer work. I felt like I was just a paycheck and a lawnmower." "That's not fair," Sarah interjected. "You were working 60-hour weeks, you'd come home exhausted and barely speak to me. I found those activities because I was lonely." So you were both lonely, Dr. Martinez observed. But instead of addressing that loneliness together, you each found ways to cope separately. When Rebecca started paying attention to me, David continued, it felt like someone actually saw me. She laughed at my jokes, she asked about my day, she made me feel like I mattered. And what did Rebecca represent to you? Dr. Martinez asked. David was quiet for a long moment. Escape. The possibility of being someone different. Someone who wasn't failing at marriage. Sarah, how does it feel to hear David describe his relationship with Rebecca? Sarah had been dreading this question. It hurts. But I also recognize some of what he's describing. I was pulling away from our marriage too. I was building a life that didn't include him. Why do you think you were pulling away? Because I was tired of trying to connect with someone who seemed to have checked out emotionally. David would come home and sit on his phone for hours. He'd forget conversations we'd had, ignore plans we'd made. I felt like I was married to a stranger, so you both felt disconnected from each other, but neither of you addressed it directly with the other person. We tried, David said. We had the same fight over and over again. Sarah would say I wasn't present, I'd say she was too demanding, we'd both get defensive, and nothing would change. And eventually, you both stopped trying, Dr. Martinez said. Yes, Sarah said quietly. It felt hopeless. But you're both here now, Dr. Martinez pointed out. What's changed? Sarah and David looked at each other. The amnesia game, Sarah said. As twisted as it was, it forced us both to imagine what our marriage could be if we were different people. And you discovered that you wanted to be those different people, Dr. Martinez said. Yes, David said. When I was trying to be the man Sarah described, I felt like myself for the first time in years. Not the stressed, overwhelmed version of myself, but the man I used to be. The man who wrote love letters and planned surprises, and actually enjoyed spending time with his wife. And you, Sarah? I realized that I'd been holding on to so much anger and resentment that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be generous with my love. When I was creating those stories about our perfect marriage, I was remembering what it felt like to believe in us. Dr. Martinez made some notes. I want to give you both a homework assignment. This week, I want you to each write a letter to the other person. But not about your current relationship. I want you to write to the person you were when you first fell in love. What did you love about them? What did you hope for? What did you promise each other? And then what? David asked. Moment. Then you read the letters to each other. But not as the people you are now. I want you to read them as the people you were then. I want you to remember who you were before you became who you are now. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of her. She thought about David at 26, when they'd first met at a friend's wedding. He'd been so confident, so charming, so full of dreams about the future. He'd asked her to dance, and when she'd said she was a terrible dancer, he'd said, "Then we'll be terrible together." She began to write. Dear David, I fell in love with your laugh first. Not just the sound of it, but the way you threw your whole body into it, the way you weren't afraid to be joyful. You had this way of making everyone around you feel like they were the most interesting person in the world. I loved how you talked about your future like it was this grand adventure we were going to have together. You said you wanted to travel, to build something meaningful, to be the kind of couple that other people looked at and thought, that's what love looks like. I loved how you were with my family. You weren't intimidated by my father's questions or my mother's fussing. You just showed up, completely yourself, and won them over without even trying. I loved how you made me feel safe to be myself. I'd never been able to be silly with anyone before, but with you I could be goofy and ridiculous and know that you'd just laugh and be silly right back. I loved your ambition, but I also loved how you said that none of it would matter if we didn't have each other. You said success was meaningless if you didn't have someone to share it with. Like lofty, like it was the first time, every time. How you said, I love you, like you'd just discovered the words. Like lofty, I loved the man you were, and I loved the man you said you wanted to become. I believed in us so completely that I couldn't imagine a future where we weren't together. I still love that man. I hope he's still in there somewhere. Sarah. In his study, David was struggling with his own letter. He kept starting and stopping, crumpling up pages and throwing them away. Finally, he closed his eyes and tried to remember Sarah at 24, with her paint-stained fingers and her wild curly hair, and her way of getting completely absorbed in whatever she was doing. Dear Sarah, I fell in love with your passion, the way you talked about art, about books, about life itself. You had this intensity that drew me in like a magnet. When you looked at me, I felt like you were seeing something in me that I didn't even know was there. Life itself. I loved how you challenged me. You never let me get away with being lazy or superficial. You asked hard questions and expected real answers. You made me want to be smarter, kinder, more thoughtful. I loved how you believed in me. When I was struggling in law school, when I was worried about my future, you never doubted that I'd figure it out. You had this faith in me that was stronger than my faith in myself. I loved how you were with kids. I'd watch you with your nieces and nephews, and I'd think, that's the mother of my children. You were so patient, so creative, so full of wonder. I loved how you made ordinary moments feel special. You'd put on music while we cooked dinner, or suggest we eat lunch on the fire escape just because the light was pretty. You turned our tiny apartment into a home. Martas Valagaski. I loved how you forgave me when I was stupid or thoughtless. You never held grudges. You'd call me out on my mistakes, but then you'd help me figure out how to do better. Nakori. I loved how you trusted me with your heart. You told me about your fears, your dreams, your worst embarrassments. You let me see all of you, and somehow that made me want to be worthy of that trust. I loved the woman you were, and I loved the woman you were becoming. I wanted to spend my whole life watching you grow and change and become more yourself. See all of you. I failed that woman. I stopped being the man she fell in love with. But I want to find my way back to him, if it's not too late. David. The next week, they sat in Dr. Martinez's office, letters in hand. Who would like to go first? She asked. Sarah raised her hand. I will. She looked at David, and for a moment, she tried to see him as he was at 26. Then she began to read. 6 months later, Sarah and David sat in their therapist's office for what would be their last session. How are you feeling about the progress you've made? Dr. Martinez asked. Sarah looked at David, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, she said. Learning to trust again. Learning to be vulnerable with someone who hurt me so deeply. And you, David? Dr. Martinez asked. I'm grateful, David said. Grateful that Sarah gave me a chance to become the man I should have been all along. Grateful that she saw something in me worth saving, even when I couldn't see it myself. The amnesia story, Dr. Martinez said. You've both described it as a turning point. Can you explain why? Sarah and David exchanged a look. They'd never told Dr. Martinez the full truth about those first few weeks. It gave us both a chance to pretend, Sarah said finally. To pretend we were the people we wanted to be instead of the people we'd become. And pretending became practice, David added. Practice became a habit. Habit became who we really are. A year after the accident, Sarah and David renewed their vows in a small ceremony in their backyard. Sarah wore a simple white dress, and David read the vows he'd written himself. No pretense, no performance, just truth. I promise to choose you, he said, his voice steady and sure. Not just today, but every day. Especially on the days when it's hard. Especially when I'm tired or scared or feeling like I'm not enough. I promise to let you choose me, Sarah replied. To believe that you mean it when you say you love me. To fight for us instead of against us. After the ceremony, as they cleaned up the backyard, Sarah found David looking at the folder of fake love letters she'd created during his amnesia. You kept them? She asked. They remind me of who I want to be, he said. The man you saw in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. Sarah smiled. You know, the real David, the one I fell in love with. He did write me letters. Not every week, but sometimes. When we were dating. I remember, David said. I was so afraid of saying the wrong thing in person. Writing gave me courage. Maybe you could start again, Sarah suggested. Real letters this time. No pretense. David nodded, pulling her close. I'd like that. I'd like to tell you every day how grateful I am that you didn't give up on us. 3 years later, Sarah found David in his study, writing at his desk. She looked over his shoulder at the letter he was composing. My dearest Sarah, it read, today marks 3 years since I stopped pretending to have amnesia and started pretending to be the man you deserved. Somewhere along the way, the pretending became real. I love you not because I have to, but because I choose to. Every day, I choose you. That's beautiful, Sarah said, kissing the top of his head. I was thinking, David said, turning in his chair to face her. Memory is a funny thing. We remember what we want to remember. We forget what's too painful to hold on to. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we were both suffering from amnesia, in a way. You forgot how to trust. I forgot how to love. The accident didn't give me amnesia. It gave us both a chance to remember who we really were. Sarah considered this. So what do we remember now? David stood and wrapped his arms around her. We remember that love is a choice. We remember that marriage is work. We remember that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a relationship is almost losing it. And what do we forget? Sarah asked. We forget who we were when we were hurting each other, David said. We remember only who we became when we decided to heal. Sarah smiled and kissed him, tasting the salt of happy tears on both their lips. Outside, the roses were blooming again, and the future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten love letter, full of possibility, full of choice, full of the kind of love that survives even the deepest betrayal. In the end, the memory game had taught them both the most important lesson of all, that the person you choose to be today matters more than the person you were yesterday, and that sometimes, the best way to remember who you are is to forget who you thought you had to be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.